lecture, we're going to turn our attention to Augustine, or Augustine, or Saint Augustine, or Saint Augustine, depending on what you're familiar with. And for some people, when they talk about Africa, all they want to talk about is Augustine. Well, we finally have reached Augustine, but as you can tell, it's not all we're going to talk about. And if you go to some academic conferences on early Christianity, you have the impression that there was Augustine, and then there were a few other people who wrote a few things, but mainly it's all about Augustine. So obviously he's important, and we're going to talk about him in a few lessons, the next 3 lessons. But certainly we want to keep his importance in perspective overall within African Christianity. So this lecture is going to be Augustine the Man. So this is a general biography of Augustine, giving some of the context from his life, and then we'll come back and talk more specifically about some elements of his writings and his teachings. So he's born in 354 and dies in 430. This means that Augustine is born in a period in which Christianity is legal, but it's not until the year 380 that Christianity becomes the official religion of the empire. So it's still not the official religion, it's favored in some ways, but he's also born in the middle of the period when the Arians and the non-Arians are going back and forth and basically trading places among the emperors. One emperor is an Arian, the next one's a non-Arian, anti-Arian, or Orthodox, or Catholic, or whatever term we want to use. So he's born in the midst of this period. And he comes from what is now Algeria. He's born in a place called Tagaste in Numidia. So the region is called Numidia. It's the region to the west of Carthage, modern-day Algeria. So he's an African, a true African. Augustine's father, by all accounts, was a pagan. And we get a lot of the information about his early life from his confessions. And we're going to talk more about the confessions in the next lecture. His father was pagan, not a Christian, but his mother was a Christian. His mother, Monica. And Monica was held in great esteem by Augustine. He adored her. He thought she was wonderful. Well, he came to adore her. When he was young, she kind of annoyed him. But later on, he understood how wise and wonderful she was. And I know that at least in the Western Church, she is canonized. She's Saint Monica. And I was once involved in a discussion with someone saying, why didn't they canonize Augustine's mother? And I said, have you ever heard of Santa Monica, California? Santa Monica. This is Saint Monica, named after Augustine's mother. They picked a very beautiful spot on the beach to honor Augustine's mother in Santa Monica. In his early days, he's being raised. His mother wants to influence him for Christianity, but his father is training him for public life. He's intellectually gifted, and he's from a well-to-do family, or at least a wealthy enough family that he can go to school. And he can go away to school to get good training for public life. So at a young age, he leaves his hometown, and he goes away to Madauros. Madauros was a center of learning. So there he could be trained, get moving along toward his life, his public success. And Madauros is actually a site that I had the opportunity to visit a few years ago. And so just a few pictures of Madauros. This is, we're not sure exactly what this is, right? It's a residential area. And so we can imagine whether Augustine spent a lot of time here or not. The streets through this area, Augustine would have walked these streets. Madauros is not a huge city, so Augustine would have walked these streets. And he certainly would have walked through the large open forum area in the middle of the city. And any holy site you find, if you look carefully, you will find Dr. Mike Glerup somewhere in the middle. And here he is again. Any holy site, you'll see him getting ready to take a picture. So here he is in the forum in Madauros. So places that we can say Augustine definitely was here. I looked around for a little sign that said Augustine was here. I didn't find it, but we know that Augustine was definitely here. So he spends some time in Madauros. Then he moves to Carthage. If he's going to have a successful public life, and if he's going to make a splash, and if he's going to really have opportunities, you need to go to the big city. Madauros is not the big city. Tagaste is not the big city. Carthage, that's the big city. So by his own account, he goes to Carthage. He still is not a Christian. And he says, at this point in my life, I was really only concerned with pleasure. And it's in this period of Augustine's life that he has at least one relationship with a woman. He may have had multiple girlfriends, we don't know. But he has a son who's born during this period, very young. He's around the age of probably 18 or 19 when he has a son. Does not marry the mother of his son, never marries her, and she really disappears from the story. But he does have a son early in life. So he's pursuing pleasure, but even in the midst of pursuing this pleasure, there was something inside Augustine that didn't quite sit right. And so as he looks back, he says, I was pursuing pleasure, but I had this internal conflict. And I was trying to resolve the tension between the life I wanted and the life I was living. So I was living a life of pleasure, pursuing pleasure, he says. But deep inside, I knew that's not really the life that I wanted. And so I tried to figure out how can I live at peace with myself? He wasn't peaceful within his own heart about how he was living. So he turned to philosophy. His mother, of course, said, the answer is Christianity. The answer is Christianity. The answer is Christianity. And he says it very nicely, but we have the impression that Augustine's mother was a bit of a nag at times, that she wasn't letting this go. She continued to pursue him. And in my own background, when I was a young man, I left the church for a while, and my mother would write me letters, and I always knew the last page of the letter was going to be about, are you going to church? What's happening? So when I read Augustine's stories about his mother, I understand what he's going through. I've been there. And as he looks back, he says, in the midst of using philosophy, seeking consolation through philosophy instead of through Christianity, he said, I prayed this prayer. I knew that somehow God was out there, and I said, give me chastity and continence, but not yet. Give me the ability to restrain myself from pursuing all my sexual pleasures, but not yet. Help me overcome my unrestrained sex drive, but not yet. So he's pursuing, but just not happy. So he starts looking for other answers. The next answer that Augustine falls into is the Manichaean religion, Manichaeanism. And for 9 years, Augustine is a Manichaean. And I won't try to give all the details of the Manichaean religion. The basic idea is it's a dualistic religion of light and dark. That's the idea, light and dark, and also fatalism. There's a certain element of fatalism in Manichaeanism, that things are already decided. There's a kind of hopelessness, in the worst way, I guess, to look at it. Things are already decided. And he pursued this for 9 years, trying to find truth, trying to find comfort in this religion. Near the end of his time, something happens. He goes home to Africa, and one of his closest friends dies while he's there. And Augustine tells us in his Confessions about conversations he has with this close friend in the days leading up to the death of his friend. And his friend had converted to Christianity. And Augustine says, I tried to joke with him about that, like, oh, wasn't it so funny when you became a Christian? And he said, my friend was not laughing. My friend didn't think there was anything funny about this at all. And the fact that his friend took this so seriously really began to shake Augustine. He says, my heart was utterly darkened by this sorrow when his friend finally dies. And everywhere I looked, I saw death. My native place was a torture room to me. I asked my soul why it was so downcast. Think of the Psalms. Why so downcast, O my soul? He's echoing scripture here. And why this bothered me so deeply. But it did not know how to answer me. In the death of his friend, he saw deep despair. And he said, what's the answer? How can I resolve this? But he said, there was nothing in me that could answer that. Nothing that I had could solve this tension within my heart. And he says, a strange kind of feeling had come over me. For now it was tiresome to live and a fearful thing to die. He reached such a level of desperation that life was difficult. Living just seemed too hard, but he was also afraid to die. So he knew something was not right. This period is when he leaves Manichaeanism, but he still has nowhere to go. He still has not figured out yet what he's going to do. How am I going to resolve this issue? A critical event is when Augustine moves to Milan, and he seems to do so for professional reasons, for a job. But there he hears about this local bishop, a guy named Ambrose, and he hears that Ambrose is a really good speaker. Now, Augustine has a classical education. He's been trained in classical rhetoric, and he hears that Ambrose is a really, really good speaker. So, in fact, it seems like people go to Ambrose just to hear him speak. Okay, I'll go. I'll see what he has to say. So he goes to listen to Ambrose, and he thinks Ambrose is a wonderful speaker. He loves Ambrose's delivery. He loves his rhetoric. This is a man, Ambrose is a man who really knows how to use the language. And Augustine says, I loved hearing him talk, but his message just bounced off my heart and off my head. So he was hearing him, he was entertained by Ambrose, but his heart wasn't changed by what he was hearing. So he's still searching, still searching. In the summer of 386, Augustine has his conversion moment. And he describes it, that he was in the back garden of the house, and he was just in despair. I cannot resolve all these tensions within myself. I can't figure this out. And he was thinking about how wretched he was and how pathetic and pitiful he was. And then he said, I heard something like a song coming from children in the next over the wall. And they were humming this little tune. And the tune went, take it and read, take it and read. In Latin, tolo lege, tolo lege. And he heard this kind of sing-songy repetition over and over and over again. And he said he began to think, is it a sign? Is it for me? So he said, I picked up a copy of Paul's epistles and I just opened it. Now, this is not a sustainable model of Bible study. So I don't commend that every day you just let the Bible fall wherever and then say, okay, I'm going to focus on this. Right? But there are times in history when maybe God does break in specific ways, and I think this is one of them. He opens it, and it falls to Romans chapter 13. In fact, verses, what we now call the verses 13 and 14, in his Bible, there were no chapters or verses. He just opened it, and this passage caught his eye. Let us behave decently as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. How should we behave? Not with unrestrained sexual activity, not with drunkenness, not with being jealous and hateful. That's not the way to live. And he read this and he said it was like a spear through my heart. And suddenly everything became clear to him. He realized that the truth of this scripture hit his heart and changed him. Finally, as well as Ambrose spoke, Ambrose never penetrated his heart. But on this day, in this garden, this verse penetrated his hard heart in a way that had never happened before. He's baptized the following Easter, Easter of 387. He's baptized by Ambrose in Milan. And if you go to Milan today, you can actually go and see the remains of the baptistry. This is the baptistry of Ambrose. So this is the baptistry in which Augustine was baptized. Presumably it was in better shape when he was baptized, but this is it. This is the place that Augustine was baptized. After his baptism, his conversion to Christianity, he takes that verse seriously, renouncing the flesh. And so what does he do? If you're renouncing the flesh, what kind of Christianity appeals to you? Well, monasticism, the monastic life. And so Augustine goes and founds a monastic community in North Africa. His idea is in essence, to withdraw from the society that he found so polluted with these impure thoughts and activities. He wants to withdraw and be a monk. But time after time, Augustine keeps getting pulled into public life. And eventually, against his wishes, in 395 or 396, he becomes the Bishop of Hippo. Hippo Regius is the longer name. A city in what is now Annaba in Algeria. And he serves as Bishop of Hippo until his death in the year 430. So in 10 years, he goes from a very hard-hearted, anti-Christian perspective to becoming the bishop. So Augustine comes to Hippo, and I've shown you a few pictures along the way. We've seen a similar shot before. Here is the Basilica of Augustine, and he preached from a seat up here in this apse. And then from a different angle before, we saw the baptistry associated with the church. So this is the 4th century, early 5th century baptistry. So when Augustine preached and if people came to be baptized, this is where he baptized them, this exact spot. So that's a brief biographical overview of Augustine, where he comes from, how he got to where he was. And we'll talk about his confessions in the next unit. But you see, as he looked back, he sees how even early on, maybe God was planting seeds that he didn't see at the time. His training in rhetoric and speech served him very well as a bishop and as a writer. That thing in his heart that would not let him rest, that kept driving him towards something else. His meeting with Ambrose, his mother, the influence of his mother, the death of his friend. And as difficult as it is to say, there are times in our lives when God uses catastrophes, terribly sad things in our life. God turns and uses those things for his own purposes. Clearly, the death of his friend at a young age was very destabilizing for Augustine. It was a very sad event. But God uses this to create in him a dissatisfaction and another longing, a further longing that eventually is satisfied when he accepts Christianity. So questions about Augustine the person, about Augustine the man, and we'll move into talking about some of his works in the next lesson, but let's think about who he was in his context. Yes?
Why Hippo? Because it's the first time that we hear about this city, and we never hear about it again in the course of history. So yes. I think this is a small city for a size of a person like Augustine.
Yes, so why Hippo? Why is, considering that it doesn't seem to be a major city compared to other cities, for someone as great as Augustine, why does he get sent to Hippo? It's very possible because when he's ordained bishop, he hasn't become Augustine yet. And he hasn't become the most influential theologian in the Western Church. At this point, he's a convert. He's a convert who has some skills, and so the Bishop of Carthage seems to think Hippo is a good place for him. It's not a tiny village, I mean, it's a city, but at this point, he's put there because maybe that's what's available. That's a city that needs a bishop, and he seems to have good enough skills to do that. Does he outgrow the city in some ways? Perhaps, but canon law said once you are ordained bishop of one city, you can't move to another city. So even if people thought he was really great, they couldn't move him to Carthage. Although we see cases where this happens in the East, and that causes some controversy at the church councils, because you have bishops moving from one city to another, which is against canon law. But Augustine seems to have followed the canon law in this sense. And certainly he was a very influential figure. And to what extent does he seem even bigger to us because we don't have the writings from other people? If we had all of Cyprian's writings, if we had all of Tertullian's writings, if we had all of the writings of Lactantius, would we have a more balanced view of where Augustine fits into the history of the African church? Possibly. But we have so much writing by Augustine. He almost sucks all the oxygen out of the room in a way. But at the time that he's ordained, people see he has skills, but maybe they don't see fully how many skills he has.